Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and welcome to episode 3 of your virtual A350 type rating. Today we're going to program the FMS for our departure, and this is going to be a little bit of a longer one, but you will quickly see that the A350 FMS actually is a very logical evolution of the previous Airbus FMSs. So let's get right into it. Now, the FMS is located down here in the MFD, in the multifunction display. The reason why it's called that way is because you do have more functions than just the FMS down here. And indeed, we start this procedure not within the FMS, but we are going to first of all go to the ATC COM page that we have down here. And on this one, we ensure that ADSC is connected, and then we head over to the message record, go to all messages and check if there is any previously stored message. If there is, delete them all. You will have a delete button right up here then. Now, once we're done on that, we go to the surveillance page, and over here we check that our transponder is actually in standby mode. Now, when those two are done, then we can press the init button, and that leads us to our flight's setup. So we're going to check that the flight number is correct up here. Then we check our departure, our destination, and the alternate. Again, if you haven't seen the first part of the tutorial, in episode number 1, I actually tell you how to uplink a flight plan. So that should already be done at this point. From here we move down to our cruise flight level, and we check that this is correct according to our flight plan. And now we have two things to do that actually are based on a bug in the real-world FMS. The real-world FMS doesn't update the cruise temperature or the tropopause automatically, so you've got to do that manually. Now, we can get this piece of information from our flight plan. I'm using the Lufthansa layout over here, and we can get it from right down here. Normally we take the first waypoint after the top of climb, because the leader system actually has a bug that can show you incorrect information on the top of climb system. So we take the first one below that. So we can see the outside temperature is minus 58 degrees and the tropopause is in 35,000 feet. And we're going to enter both of those. These are important for our performance computations later on in the flight. Now let's have a look at basics, how we can do entries in the FMS. For this we're using the KCCU, and the keyboard control unit, let's just refer to it like that, basically allows you to steer the cursor using that little mouse button up here, and you also have a mouse wheel that you can use to scroll through lists. We're going to see all of that in action later on during this setup. For now, let's start by entering our cruise temperature. Remember that was minus 58 degrees, so we click on the field in here, and now we select minus down here, and then 5, 8. When we're done with that, hit the enter button, and you will notice that the cursor now automatically jumps to the next field in the normal sequence of setup events. But as mentioned, the cruise temperature and the tropopause are ignored, so you gotta do those manually. So let's now have a look at an alternative method of entering information in the FMS. When you click on a field over here, and then press your left control key on the keyboard, you can see on the bottom of the FMS in the scratch pad that we now have the keyboard input active, and now we can type stuff in using our actual physical keyboard. So let's type 35,000 here for the tropopause and then hit enter in order to confirm that number. And by confirming that, we are also getting out of the keyboard input mode. Next we can go to company wind request, and we're going to do this in order to update our cruise winds for the flight. We check our cost index, we check our trip wind, and now we are going to go down to those buttons down here. Now you can see that there are 5 buttons located at the bottom over here, and those basically guide us through the FMS setup. So we're going to start with the IRS. We click on here and we check that the IRSs are indeed in nav mode. Now, if the IRSs have not finished alignment yet, you will see the time remaining for alignment right over here. Now, after we've checked that the nav mode is indeed selected, we can return, and then we go to the departure page, and over here we can select our SID. So let's go to the runway list, and now you can see we've got a list over here, and we've got to pick our runway. Now you can of course simply select it with a cursor and click on it, but let's have a look at an alternate input. You can also use the wheel down here to scroll through everything on that list. So if we want to select runway 35 left, like here, then we can mark that using the cursor and then hit enter. And you can see that our cursor now automatically jumps to the next field where we've got to do an input. And the next input we need is going to be the SID. So let's click on that and the list opens. And then we can check on our flight plan which SID we need, and we can see it's the Tupdu for Charlie departure. So let's use the wheel to scroll down to the Tupdu for Charlie. Or in our case we've got the Tupdu for Delta of 35 left. That is alright though. So let's select the Tupdu for Delta and then we can insert that. The cursor automatically jumps to temporary flight plan. Click on that and now we can immediately click insert temporary. And that's our SID now inserted into the flight plan. At this point I do recommend that you are already going to cross-check the SID against the departure chart. So for that, let's head over into plan mode on our nav display, select the decent range, like this, and also make sure that constraints are selected over here. Now, let's go down to the terminal charts up here in our electronic flight bag, and I did already prepare and pin the charts needed, so we do have it right up here. Now, this is the Tupdu for Charlie, but remember we wanted to use the Tupdu for Delta, so let's unpin this. Go to the departure page just to show you how this is done, and down here we can now find the SID in question. So Tupdu for Delta, here it is. Let's pin that, and now we have it available right down here. So let's now go ahead and check our waypoints. For this, we are basically just going over the waypoint names, the altitudes, and any possible speed restrictions, as you can see in here. You can nicely scroll through this using the scroll wheel down here, and like that you can navigate through the different waypoints on your ND. So now comparing the FMS with the chart, we can see Fox Mike 012 above 1750 feet, maximum 240 knots. Then we go on to Fox Mike 090, Gofgu, Unlir, and finally Tupdu. And that's our SID now checked. From here we go down to our destination Vienna, we select this, then we can select the runway, we select our landing runway, which is 34 today, and then we can select the approach, which is going to be an ILS approach. And if you are searching for information, you don't always want to look left and right. Here's a small tip. You can use the Captain OAS on center button to bring the OAS right down to the screen, so that way you can easily jump into the OFP. You can see, okay, Natex to Whiskey, so then you can go out of that again, select the star, Natex to Whiskey, and then you can go back into here, terminal charts, Vienna, search, and now we can find that arrival, Natex to Whiskey. Can already pin that one for later usage, and we can see it leads us towards Pesat. So if we go back into the FMS, we can see via Pesat 5 November, temporary, and insert. Alright, and that's our route now entered. It is a good idea just to scroll through the entire flight plan using the scroll wheel down here, just to check that your flight plan is correctly uplinked into the FMS, that there is nothing looking strange, and that there are no discontinuities that are not meant to be there. Remember, especially after a vector lag, a discontinuity is normal, so don't just delete them, but ask yourself, why is a discontinuity in the FMS, and do we need it? Do we need to keep it? The answer is, yeah, you probably might. So from here we go back to the init page, and then we go back down to the next button, and next are the nav aids. Now, we are completely doing PBN navigation here. That means we don't need to tune any nav aids as backups in the A350. However, some nav aids might be required in case of engine failures and the engine outsits, so enter nav 8 as needed. Then we're going to hit return, and next we can go to the fuel and load panel, and this is where we enter all our fuel information. Now, let's bring up the load sheet panel over here and start our system entries. So we start with the zero fuel weight, and the zero fuel weight is located just up here, so we can see it's 178.7. So let's enter 178.7, enter. And then the cursor jumps onto the next field, which is the zero fuel weight CG. And that is again located on the load sheet page, and we can see that the zero fuel CG is 25.93, so we're going to round that to 25.9 and insert. Next it wants to know the block fuel, we can see that on the ECAM, 21.9, and we can enter that. Enter. Next it wants to know the passenger numbers, and we can see that on our OIS, 324. The passenger numbers are important because, as we can see on the overhead panel, with the airflow selector in the norm position, the aircraft is automatically going to adjust the airflow based on the number of passengers entered in here. So that way it provides the most optimal airflow, reducing fuel usage as much as possible. Last but not least, we're also going to enter the taxi fuel and the other figures such as route reserves, alternate and final. And again, I'm going to cheat over here and I'll go to the OIS right down here. In the real world wouldn't do that, in the real world I'd just look to the left, but in the sim this is just a bit easier. So we can see 400 kilos of taxi fuel, so let's go over here and I'm going to use my keyboard entry 0.4. Then the reserves are 0.6. So yeah, 0.5 by default is fine. Then the alternate 2.9. So let's enter that, 2.9. And we'll keep the final reserves on automatic for the time being. Then we can see this leaves us with an extra fuel of 5 tons or 57 minutes. So let's now hit return and go back to the previous panel. And last but not least, we have the takeoff performance. Now, the A350 is a fully integrated aircraft, so if we just go down to the takeoff performance that we've already calculated, we can simply hit send to FMS, and you can see that sends the takeoff data, so we'll just hit confirm takeoff speeds, and that stuff is entered. The only information that is not sent is the pack status, so we've got to select that manually. Also, the takeoff shift up here, which was roughly 200 meters for us today, so let's go ahead and enter that as well. 200. And last but not least, we check the thrust reduction and acceleration altitudes, which are in line for noise abatement procedure number 1 today. We check the transition altitude against the departure chart, which we can do right up here. Let's go to the SID, and we can see that up here, transition altitude 12,000, and that's 12,000 indeed. Engine out acceleration, we're using 1,500 above the ground by default, so that's going to be 1,830. So let's enter that, 1,830, and enter. Now, next we're going to move on to the climb panel. And up here we want to check that auto derate is selected on the thrust, and we can pre-select any speed as needed. So for example, if you wanted to keep your speed low right after liftoff, then you could pre-select something over here. Now, next we move to the position monitor page that we can see linked on the bottom already, and over here we're going to enter our departure runway. This just gives us a nice little reference to our actual position to the airport in case we need to do an immediate return. So down here you can now see your bearing and your distance to the departure runway threshold. And that finishes the basic parts of the setup. But no worries, we are by far not done yet. It is an A350 after all, one of the most integrated computerized aircraft available at the moment. So next we are going to go back to the flight plan page, and then we go down to the flight plan info that we have down here. And this field has a lot of additional information for us. For example, we find the fix info page over here. So let's go on to that. So going on to the fix info page, we can enter our departure runway as the reference fix. So that's going to be LTFM 35, right? Enter that. And now we are going to draw a radial down here, and that is going to be our extended runway centerline. So for that, let's have a quick look at the taxi routes to learn our runway track, which is 354. So let's enter radial 354 up here, and that now draws us an extended runway centerline. We can check that on our ND over here. Looking at the arc display, you can see that blue line over here. Now next we're going to program our engine out SID, and we do that in the secondary flight plan. So you can press the sec index button down here, and then we're going to hit import and active. It's very important. You do have 3 secondary flight plans available. It is recommended to use secondary 1 for your engine out SID, secondary 2 for a copy of the active, but leave secondary 3 empty. The reason for that is that if ATC sends you a route uplink through CPDLC, that can only be inserted in secondary 3, and therefore you don't want to enter anything over there. So we've got sec 1 over here. Now we can edit it to include our engine out SID. After we've imported it, we go to the flight plan button over here, and now we go to our departure runway and we click insert next waypoint, and over here we can now enter our engine out waypoint. Since we have none in our database, we can program this manually. So let's click into here, and I am going to use the FMS keyboard input again. So that's going to be LTFM 35 right /. Now we insert the runway track 354, and we're going to go straight ahead for 25 miles. So /25, hit insert, deactivate the keyboard input, and now we can see a place bearing distance point is entered exactly 25 miles ahead on the extended centerline. Now we click on this, and we are going to go down to new destination down here. And on this we are going to enter our departure airport, LTFM once again. And now we have removed any of the waypoints behind the one from which we just selected the revisions panel. And now we can insert an immediate relanding. So let's go back on the LTFM. We're going to go onto arrival, select our runway, and well, this is where the system sometimes bugs around a little bit. Over here we would enter our arrival runway and the approach, then go back to return, and then we'd have the immediate relanding entered. Unfortunately, occasionally you do encounter issues in the iniBuilds A350 like we just did. For this reason I'm not going to enter anything over there anymore. Next we go back to the secondary flight plan and go on to sec 2, and that one is simply going to be a copy of the active flight plan without any modifications to it. Last but not least, let's go back down into the actual flight plan, into the active one, and over here we can now insert any step climbs that we may have in our route. So again, we click on the lateral revision of any of those waypoints, and then we can select step alts right down here. Now the way we are going to do this is we are going to have a look at the flight plan, and we can see that in today's flight we do have one step climb. That's flight level 400 at the waypoint Navot. So let's go into here, and we can now either select Navot from the list, like this, or you can just type it in manually as well. Now let's go to the altitude field. We're going to enter 400, press insert, and that's it. Like that you have now entered your step climb. Then you go to temporary flight plan, insert temporary, and that's your step climb entered. Now if you are on the fuel and load page, so let's just do that again. Okay, that's bugging around a little bit here. No, we don't want to do that. There we go, that's better. So if you're on the fuel and load page and you see negative extra fuel down there, always check that you have actually entered the step climbs. At the very end of the setup, it's also a good idea to go to init again and just insert your wind uplink. Then you are going to check any of the information you might have down here, clear any of those away, and then we can press the performance button once again. And with that, our FMS setup is now completed. So by default, we're going to show the performance panel on the left, the flight plan on the right, respectively the performance on the pilot flying side, which in the sim is probably always going to be you, the captain, but you show that on the pilot flying side and that on the pilot monitoring side. And that finishes our FMS setup. We aren't completely done yet though. Associated with the FMS setup, we are also going to cross-check our FCU. So the last thing over here is to go right up here onto the FCU. We are going to set our QNH, which was 1034 today. Then we are going to set up the EFIS as needed. My recommendation is constraints and airports. You can select them both at the same time in the A350, which is quite nice. And then also VOR2, traffic, and VOR1. Now we normally want to be on the arc mode with a range of 10 miles here for takeoff, but you can already go down into the zoom setting, which brings up your airport navigation function, the ANF. And that one basically is a live taxi map. You do need to have a Navigraph subscription to use this though, but really, really recommend it. Next we move over to our FCU. We check that the flight directors are on, and we check that the true or magnetic heading is selected as needed for our departure. The vast majority of airports in the world are going to use magnetic. And then we set our initial climb altitude. Now, that's normally going to be located on your departure chart. If you're using the default simulator Lido charts, unfortunately, these pages are currently not available in Flight Simulator, so you got to ask your air traffic controller what the initial altitude is going to be. If you're using the Navigraph / Jeppesen charts, you got the initial climb clearance right down here, 5,000 feet in our case. So let's go up here, set 5,000, and when that is set, we always select 100 on the altitude selector. The reason for that is if we accidentally hit something on the FCU, you immediately see 5,100. But if you had set that to 1,000 and you accidentally set 6,000, that's easier to miss. So always set that back to 100s. Let's also do that same EFIS setup for our first officer. And with that, we have everything prepared up here. Well, my friends, the very last thing to do is the oxygen test. That just is part of the procedure, so we go down here to the oxygen mask, press the press to test button, then press and hold the emergency button, and then the press to test button again. Ensure that the mask is testing properly, and then you can close that up again, and that finishes that part. Well, my friends, and that's our FMS setup completed. At this point, we would now conduct our departure briefing, but that's going to be a topic for a dedicated video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this one interesting. Leave your questions in the comments underneath the video, and if you're up for more, don't forget to like the video and press that subscribe button, as it really helps out the channel. Last but not least, if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.